You guys are really something else. You're getting so anxious just someone can walk up onto the stage and you start clapping. This is a real honor indeed this afternoon for me to present the particular program, and I'll mention just why in a minute. But brothers, this afternoon we focus on what we could call the hot topics of the fraternity. Lambda Chi Alpha is never reluctant to talk about these topics. In my many years in Lambda Chi Alpha, more years than I would really like to recall sometimes, as a High Pi, as an involved alumnus, and on Grand High Zeta, it gives me a great deal of pride in knowing that our fraternity has never skirted issues. We have faced the problems directly, whether the issues happen to be hazing, drinking, drugs, or lack of standards. You, the undergraduates, have had the foresight to talk and discuss the issues and do something about those things facing Lambda Chi Alpha. During the week, it has been my privilege to present Frank with Frank's Funnies. This afternoon, he is our major presenter. Frank Maez has been exposed to many of the hot topics in Lambda Chi Alpha. By virtue of his position as Director of Chapter Services, he has indeed been involved in the heart and core of most of the problems. Frank is a graduate of the University of New Mexico and was an initiate, or is an initiate, of Zeta Mu Zeta. Frank joined the staff in 1970 as a chapter consultant and traveled for 5 years. After serving for 1 year on the staff with the Up With People organization, Frank returned to Lambda Chi Alpha as Director of Chapter Services, a position he has now held for the past 7 years. This afternoon, Frank will share with you some very thought-provoking, sensitive issues which face Lambda Chi Alpha and indeed every chapter. Frank, please come and put it on us.
Thank you, Bobby Ray. The preparations that I made for this particular session, I must confess, are rather minimal. I make no apologies for that because deep down inside, I feel so strongly about some of the things that I will share with you tonight. Some of these things are very easy to talk about, but very difficult to discuss. As Bobby Ray mentioned, during my break as chapter consultant and director of chapter services, I had the opportunity to work with a group called Up With People. I worked on their staff. And in that capacity, I had the opportunity to visit several orphanages, hospitals, college campuses, old people's homes, schools, neighborhoods, any place that we could find people. And if I learned anything from the Up With People experience, it was to perhaps be a little bit more socially aware of some things that can affect people's lives, that can hurt other people, and that can help other people. One of the songs in the program that year I dearly love because it best expresses what we are going to talk about this afternoon. Some of those things that we will talk about can be dealt with by simple aggressive action. Other things can be dealt with by taking action when appropriate. And still other things only time can heal. And in some other instances, the best action may be no action. The song that I am referring to that I would like to share with you is titled Save the Dancer. And it goes like this. The ravages of human history, the savageness of our sword, are as much of our legacy as the heights we have explored. It seems our questing for paradise is dressed in paradox, grown-ups playing with power like children playing with blocks. Through the darkness, a dancing image, the hope of what could be. Save the dancer. By now you recognize that the dancer is the symbol for social development, and its statement of intention is very simple: social awareness, creativity, and style. If the words "to save the dancer" are unclear in their relationship to the chapter and the fraternity experience, allow me to make some interpretations. First, the downfalls that we, as a fraternity chapter, as a fraternity system, have experienced are as much of a legacy as those heights which we have explored. Second, it seems that in our quest for fraternalism, we often dress it in paradox or contradictory activities. 3, grown-ups playing with human beings' minds and feelings like children playing with blocks. And 4, sometimes the ravage and insensitivity of our very actions can be very savage in their impact on other people. Every winter, the administrative staff travels to a place called French Lick, Indiana, where we have our staff retreat, very similar to your chapter retreat. It is at that time that we look at different programs of our fraternity as well as problems and try to define them, refocus our attention, and perhaps provide some solutions to those things. At the last retreat, which we held last January, the discussion was brought up as to what perhaps can best be identified today as social issues, or those things that concern our chapters that have an impact on them. In a sense, I guess you could call them hot topics, and the reason for that is that so many fraternities across the country will not treat them because they're sort of the hot potato items that you're afraid to touch. In many respects, this particular discussion grew out of a small task force at our retreat that was talking about the alcohol awareness program and the drug education program. And one of the staff members at that task force suggested, are alcohol and drugs the only thing that affect our chapters? And a further analysis of that situation, the answer was no. There are other problems that affect our chapters, other social concerns. The next question was, should the fraternity address itself to dealing with some of these outside forces that affect our chapters and the quality of the undergraduate experience? And the answer by some of the members on the staff was yes. By others it was no. And to some others it was perhaps. So what are these outside forces that affect Lambda Chi Alpha and can in fact have a detrimental effect on your chapter? This is a list of 12 of those concerns: illegal drugs, alcohol abuse, criminal mischief, chapter pranks, social insensitivity, religious concerns, homosexuality, membership selection, auxiliaries, image, morals, hazing. These are some. There may be more. But these are outside forces that can affect the well-being of a chapter. Permit me, if you will, to further clarify some of these issues for you. And perhaps it'll serve as a framework, a reference point for questions and discussions at our sessions this afternoon. Illegal drugs. Lambda Chi Alpha has done more to have an impact on the elimination of illegal drugs on the chapter. The policy statement at the Nashville General Assembly is the strongest policy of any fraternity in the world. That policy is a product of the undergraduates, and there's a very key element in that policy that you should be aware of. That resolution makes the use of illegal drugs or the possession of those substances or paraphernalia in the chapter house illegal. But it goes even further. It also says that it is a clear offense against the fraternity and is punishable by those laws in Article 10. In a sense, it has given a strength to the Executive Committee to deal with problems with illegal drugs. We can list the many chapter tragedies that have occurred as a result of the use of illegal drugs. And as the parent organization, Lambda Chi Alpha, has been committed to keep that foremost in the minds of our undergraduates while providing programs and policies that will help you deal effectively with these problems. 2 chapters are not represented today. Our chapter at Hanover College in Hanover, Indiana, and our chapter at Bucknell University in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Those 2 chapters, over a period of time, died because illegal drugs became such a part of the chapter experience. And the only redeeming fact about those 2 incidences is that the Grand High Zeta has chosen to give rebirth to those 2 chapters next fall with a new corps of undergraduate members. The fraternity, through undergraduate leadership, alumni leadership, can eliminate this cancerous element from our chapters. Let me talk about alcohol abuse. Lambda Chi Alpha pioneered the Alcohol Awareness Program. And over a period of time, the Alcohol Awareness Program has changed in scope, in effect, in dimension. The first Alcohol Awareness Program in the late 70s that Lambda Chi introduced focused very strongly on the individual, how that can affect your lives. And now we're focusing a little stronger on how alcohol can affect your chapter experience. And we've shifted the design of the program into assisting you in developing more positive recruiting programs, more sensible social activities, handling individuals in the chapter who are drunk, protecting your chapter image, and other programming related items. The reception that was held at the opening of the seminar is an excellent example of a hidden agenda to suggest that dry programming can be a nice time. The panel discussion by student undergraduates from different campuses is another example of that kind of concern. But there's a new thing in the last 2 years that has surfaced that can affect every one of your chapters. In the last 2 years, 3 of our chapter high alphas have been arrested because the chapter sold liquor at the chapter house. As high alpha, can you imagine yourself being escorted out the door with handcuffs? That is a real concern. You cannot sell liquor. Now I'd like to shift to another topic, criminal mischief. I guess there's something that is inherently wrong when a chapter encourages its members to do something that's criminal in nature, supposedly innocent. A recent incident occurred where associate members of a chapter were sent on a scavenger hunt to steal. One of the items they had to steal was a conductor's hat. In trying to steal that conductor's hat, a fight ensued. The police came, and the young associate member was taken to jail for the night. The situation occurred last year when a very, very good chapter hurt its image by sending its associate members with the High Kappa to steal bamboo for a luau party. And yet, it had the money to buy all the decorations it needed. The instance occurred last year when another very strong chapter sent some of its brothers in mid-December to cut down a Christmas tree on the President's lawn. Well, not only was that bad, but it was even worse because the President's wife was the president of the city garden club, and this was one of her favorite trees. But these are three examples, brothers, of criminal mischief. Do you know what it feels like to get a call from the Dean of Students saying that your chapter is in trouble and must appear before the judicial board, and you ask him why? And he says, because the chapter was holding a barnyard party, which is their traditional theme party. And in this party, they decorate the house like a barn with haystacks and so on, and everybody dresses like farmers. And to add a little more dimension to it, some of the members go to the agricultural building and steal 3 prize-winning chickens of the university. Seemingly so unimportant, and yet important. And what am I supposed to say? That we'll treat this by creating a chicken awareness program? Lambda Chi Alpha has neither the time nor the money to get involved in a chicken awareness program, I assure you. But the point is that these men, these brothers, innocently were told to steal, were told to lie, were told to damage, to do something which violates our very principles. Now I'd like to shift to another topic, chapter pranks. In a sense, they're very similar as criminal mischief, except that these things are just stupid. There's nothing wrong at all in having college fun. But when it becomes inconsiderate and rude to other people, then it's wrong. When it dampens the fraternity image, it's wrong. When it endangers another person, it's wrong. We hear stories of brothers tying members to trees and bushes. We hear stories of chapters performing pranks on sororities. A very outstanding chapter was recently cited by the university for bombarding a group of girls with shaving cream pies. Stories of members dropping water balloons on innocent people walking by the house can be very common. And these are a few examples of what we consider silly, senseless, inconsiderate activities. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with good college fun, as long as it's sensible, as long as it's not inconsiderate and not rude. The next area that I'd like to suggest that you consider is something called social insensitivity. Luckily, this has not been as much of a problem, if any at all, in Lambda Chi Alpha, but it is a problem in the Greek system. A recent newspaper suggested that a chapter had designed its social program around real-life tragedies, real-life misfortunes. An example of that was an Air Florida party, a Tylenol party. You've heard of chapters creating of other fraternities, I hope, having such parties as a Jimmy Jones party. I sense it's hitting home. A Martin Luther King party. These activities, in themselves, the initial reaction is funny. But when you look deep down inside, they really are very disgusting by the very nature. They brought those fraternities down to a lower standard. Let me share with you two examples of a social activity that has turned from a nice theme party to a degenerated activity. There is one party that is called the Hun. The chapter remains nameless. The party initially was always a good time, sort of a caveman Viking type activity. But in the last few years, it has degenerated into nothing more than a bunch of rowdy drunks dressed in any kind of thing they could put together with beer cans all around the barnyard. There's another party that offends me, and it offends the community and the campus, on another campus, called the Hobo Hop. The Hobo Hop was at one time a nice party. Sure, it was everybody dressing like tramps, and it was decorating so that everything looked sort of trashy. Over a period of time, it has degenerated into nothing more than a drunken brawl. And the only decorations that you see around that house are beer cans everywhere. What is a person to think when he sees that? Now I'm going to share with you something that is disgusting, and to be perfectly honest, last month when I was at a meeting of some of my colleagues, we were talking about some of these issues. And when bringing this up, they treated it as if it was funny, and it's not. A fraternity chapter on one campus took a kitten, killed it, froze it, threw it in a punch bowl. If any chapter in Lambda Chi Alpha would ever dare do that, heaven help them. I'd like to shift now to another issue, religious concerns. Within our fraternity, we have strong convictions about the ritual of the fraternity. And there are members who find it difficulty to accept the Christian part of the ritual in its entirety. But just by the same token, there are just as many members that do not want to release that legacy. The Ritual and Emblems Committee is attempting to deal with that and has already made some efforts in trying to deal with that very difficult and sensitive dilemma on both sides. On the chapter level, does the fraternity experience provide, or should it provide, the opportunities for the individual members in the chapter to have a spiritual experience, whether it be Bible study or Mass? I think there's a place for that, so long as it doesn't divide a chapter. Now let me talk about another topic that is probably very sensitive to all of you: homosexuality. The problem doesn't escape the college fraternity. And I'm not suggesting that anyone be paranoid about that. But I frequently get calls at headquarters from a high alpha or a chapter advisor in which they have a problem where an individual has in fact declared himself or is suspected of homosexual activity. Now, most members react that the individual is criminal in nature, and sometimes they consider him as an evil person instead of treating him as a human being. Now, there is no question about it that a person's lifestyle is his own business. But when that lifestyle does in fact influence the day-to-day living situation, when it in fact damages or influences the image of that chapter, then it's not compatible to the fraternity experience. You know, probably we've had this same problem ever since fraternities were started. Or at least it's been there, not as a problem. And it may not really be a problem as a rule. I think that one of the things that has probably done more to create problems is this whole gay rights movement. In fact, the whole gay rights movement has probably done more to damage what used to be a very nice word: having a gay time. In 1920, I was reading the headline from the General Assembly that was just held. Now, this is in 1920, and the headline read as follows in the Fraternity magazine. It said, "Lambda Chi Alphas meet at gay convention." Can you imagine if tomorrow in the Muncie Herald Examiner there was a headline that says Lambda Chi Alpha holds gay leadership seminar? The next issue that I want to suggest that you consider this afternoon is membership selection. Some chapters in our fraternity may be violating the prescribed procedure for voting of our members in Lambda Chi Alpha. For starters, if they use even the blackball terminology, they are in violation of fraternity policy. If they use a 98% voting on associates or initiates, they are in sheer violation of fraternity policy. And yet, I know that some chapters may be doing that. The minimum is 51%. No chapter can set anything past 87% in voting for a member. And there's a very good reason for that. The fraternity does believe, by action of the General Assembly, which is undergraduates, that it is far more important to consider the 87% undergraduates that in fact do want an individual into the chapter than perhaps the 20% that, for different reasons, may have their opinions that the person shouldn't be in. In other words, it's fair. Legacies. We received a letter recently from an alumnus, and I will take some of those letters and read to you from them. This alumnus wrote, "I will no longer contribute to the Alumni Loyalty Fund. I have given 25 years of my life to my chapter at," the chapter will remain nameless, "as High Pi Housing Corporation president. I recommended my grandson to be considered for associate membership. The High Delta never contacted him. I wrote a second letter and received no response. My son is now a member of Phi Delta Theta. Thank you." And then I received another letter from another alumnus who said, "My nephew was a 3.0 student in high school, was a member of the baseball team, was on the dean's roll, and was active in student council. The chapter dropped him because they said he didn't fit in. In exploring that a little further, I found out why he didn't fit in. He didn't fit in because he wore glasses, because he didn't wear the right type of shirts and didn't starch them the right way. If that's the criteria for membership, then half the members of our Grand High Zeta, half the members of our administrative staff, and I dare say the majority of brothers in this room, would have been dropped from that chapter. It's really disheartening to talk to a person who has worked and given his life to the fraternity, and the chapter doesn't even give that person the consideration to invite him over to meet the other brothers. Then there's another issue that is particularly sensitive in membership selection, and that is racism. Lambda Chi Alpha does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, or creed. It never has, it never will. That is a clear violation of fraternity policy. And yet there is something that bothers me when I hear a comment that suggests that in our chapter it's going to be 10 or 15 years before a black brother will ever be able to be brought into our chapter. There is a silent suggestion there that the chapter or the alumni may never make the effort. Now, please don't mistake me in what I'm saying. I don't think that we should pursue any sort of affirmative action program of any sort. But I do feel that we have to be a little more aware, a little more aggressive, and perhaps deal with that situation. The next issue I want to talk about is auxiliaries. Little sister groups have, in many chapters, become mini sororities, and that was never the intent. The NPC, the National Panhellenic, has spoken out against little sister groups, as many are presently formed. Now, that does not suggest that they are in favor of abolishing little sister groups, nor is Lambda Chi Alpha. We're not particularly interested in creating any more, but we're not necessarily interested in abolishing them. However, we have to insist that some of these little sister groups be brought into sensible guidelines. How would you like it if you were part of a little brother group and you had to leave your chapter meeting early so that you could go serve punch at the sorority rush function? Or if your little brother orientation program took up your chapter meeting time? How would you like that? Well, that's what the women's organizations are facing. Now, no one can tell me that maybe the little sister groups are providing an experience that sororities don't provide. That carries no water. That's like saying the little brother experience is providing an experience that a fraternity experience would provide. Let me share with you a story that occurred with a little sister group. 2 years ago, I had the unpleasant duty of conducting what's called a membership evaluation. A membership evaluation is a very difficult thing and highly internal. I arrived at the chapter and met with the alumni review board that was going to be handling that process. The alumni chairman then advised me that the little sister president wanted to talk to the board, and she was on her way. Well, there was no way that I could stop it at that point, so I just said, well, we'll just visit with her, and that's it. I questioned whether she had any business in there to start with, but she came in. It was held at the home of a grand old brother, alumnus, whose name was Claire Jacobs. Claire was an elderly man, about 75 years old, and he offered his home for us to hold this meeting. Well, Claire's living room was set up in such a fashion where he had his comfortable reading chair with a lamp over the chair as he read his newspaper daily. When the lady arrived, all the alumni stood up very graciously. Claire offered her his chair, and she took it and sat down, and we just let her talk and asked her a few questions. She left. It looked very nice. 2 days later, it came to our attention that she had told the chapter that she was brought into the room, sat down on this huge chair, put a light in front of her face, and interrogated. Several years ago, we had troubles with a chapter, and it was a concern similar to a deterioration of the chapter. So we received a letter from all the little sisters in support of the chapter. I honestly wanted to tell them to stay out of it. I just didn't answer the letter. I didn't even look at it. And then, last year, we received a letter from a little sister organization, and they wanted to tell us about the deteriorating conditions of their chapter. And they went into detail. And you know what my reaction was? You know what I wanted to say? Butt out. Brothers, there is nothing wrong with having a nice, honorary kind of situation where girls that do contribute to the organization are recognized at the White Rose Formal or at Founders Day. But when they become a part of the chapter day-to-day experience, you get themselves involved in chapter politics, then you have gone beyond the bounds of what that should even be. One of the tragedies, in a way, of this Crescent Club situation has been that a very rich tradition in Lambda Chi Alpha is threatened. At General Assemblies, we have an International Crescent Girl. It has been a tradition as long as the song My Crescent Girl and the Lambda Chi Alpha Sweetheart has ever been. It had never anything to do with little sister organizations. But over the last 10 years, chapters have identified it as being, quote, the big Crescent Club person in the country. And so a very nice tradition of the Crescent Girl might have to be eliminated simply because it suggests that the general fraternity does in fact sanction Crescent Clubs. If we wanted to recognize a Crescent Club, I guess we'd have the International Crescent Club of the Year, but we have no intention of doing that.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
So much for auxiliaries. Let me talk about image now. Each of your chapters spends a lot of time doing service projects and community relations programs. But for every time that a community relations program is done, I could probably cite about 10 instances where some of our chapters have had loud stereos, unruly parties, disrespect for the neighbors, troubles with the police, things that damage the chapter experience and the chapter image. If we could only learn to deal with people and work with them and be considerate of the neighbors, of other people, we'd get a lot more mileage out of our community relations program instead of diminishing it with some of our stupid activities. The next issue I want to touch about is morals. Now that's a very touchy issue, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. I sometimes wonder if the moral fabric of our chapters may be deteriorating. And it's almost a taboo word to suggest that, but is it right for the majority of our brothers to engage in grossly immoral language in front of each other, in front of girls? Now, there's certain talk, and it's acceptable, but sometimes I think we go to the bottom of the barrel, and sometimes we don't even care if girls or ladies are in the room when we do this. Is it right for an individual member to have his female companion living with him in a chapter house? Now, private lives are private lives, but in a communal setting with mixed values, there seems to be something apparently wrong with that. And what about immoral conduct? Is it right for a brother to drop his pants in front of a girl? Is it right for a brother to urinate in front of another fraternity's house? Is it right for members to harass women as they walk past the house by holding out signs that rates them on a scale of 1 to 10? So stop doing that. And the final issue that I want to touch on is hazing. More than any other fraternity, Lambda Chi Alpha has distinguished itself in the forefront in dealing with hazing. Now, the reason has been is that Lambda Chi Alpha's answer to hazing has been radically different. Other fraternities will say the key to the elimination of hazing is positive, constructive pledge education. Lambda Chi Alpha says there will be no pledge education because the very separation of men is the root of the problem that eventually takes the form of hazing, harassment, or inconsistent behavior in supposedly a fraternity experience. So our definition, brothers, on your campus is more broad and widely encompassing. Obviously, brothers, I have perhaps raised more questions than I have provided answers. And you can well see why the initial response of members of our staff was that we should address some issues and perhaps others we should not address at all, and that other issues may take care of themselves. As we move into our discussion groups in a few minutes, I hope that you will talk about these things and share some thoughts about them. Some things do have answers. Some things do have policy statements. Some things do have direction by which to act. And if you come out of those sessions perhaps a little bit more aware of those things, a little bit more sensitive to try and correct those things if they do exist in your chapter, then this afternoon and those discussion groups will have been well worth the time. Now, so far, brothers, my comments may have appeared negative, and I can only assure you that they are not. They're constructive. I care very much about Lambda Chi Alpha, and I think that we need to be aware of some of these things. As we began this presentation, I shared with you the song, Save the Dancer, and perhaps to convey to you the real feeling that I have about you as undergraduates in trying to deal with these concerns and challenges, unafraid to face any issue and unafraid to talk about anything at all. I would like to share with you the second part of the song, which I think best describes each of you sitting in this room. But through the triumph and the tragedy, rising like a bird is a dancer always dancing. A dancer always dancing to a tune we've never heard before. Lifting us and twirling inside us, a dream is setting us free. Through the darkness, a dancing image, a hope of things that could be. For the lonely and little children, the angry and the proud. For the old man whose sight is failing, the quiet face and the proud. For the dreamers and make-believers, the festive and the sad. For the mad and the ugly, the sane and beautiful. Save the dancer in us all. Thank you.